Welcome to the Jessica Glow Up podcast. This is a place where we are healing out loud so that we no longer lose people in silence. We are working to break the stigma one conversation at a time. Today is our very first episode, so we're going to be beginning with hearing my story. I am a person who 2.5 years ago had a suicide attempt in which I could have not made it, but I chose to self-abort, meaning that I stopped. I went to inpatient, I went to Partial Hospitalization Program, Intensive Outpatient Program. I ended up in therapy, taking medication, and also getting transcranial magnetic stimulation. And I survived. I am here to share my story in hopes that it breaks the stigma and helps others to be able to get the help that they need. Because the reality is, either you may be struggling with your mental health or you know somebody who is. Because while you may think that you don't know anyone struggling with mental health, the reality is that you absolutely do. But there are so many people who are afraid to talk about what they're going through, who are afraid to admit their struggles because they think that they're going to be perceived as weak, less than, not enough, because of their mental health condition. And unfortunately, there are societies, cultures, religions, families, etc., that do judge people for their mental health conditions. People who perpetuate messages like man up or just be strong or just stay positive. And they may believe that they're doing good, but they are actually causing harm. So I am here to break it down for you so that you understand. And I know many of you get it already because many of you have been there. But we are going to talk about our stories on this podcast so that hopefully people can know that they're not alone, so that they can get connected to resources. They can learn skills and strategies that may help them to survive really difficult things. I am not a therapist. I am not a doctor. I am an ordinary human being with the experience of navigating the system. I have been to the inpatient psychiatric care. I've also been to partial hospitalization program, intensive outpatient program. I've been to individual therapy, group therapy, virtual therapy, in-person therapy, and I have also gotten an entire collection of 36 sessions of TMS, Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation. I'm about to jump into giving you my story. I do want to give a trigger warning that I am going to be real on here in a way that I haven't been on my other platforms. A lot of platforms restrict what you can talk about, but here I am speaking unfiltered and real, not leaving anything out. So if this triggers you, please know you can call or text 988 for mental health support if you are feeling that you are in crisis, or reach out to a medical provider such as a therapist, psychiatrist, or your primary care doctor if you're in need of additional support. All right, let's jump into it. I've probably had anxiety my entire life, but I was not diagnosed it until 3 years ago. I had been a go-getter perfectionist. I was the valedictorian, graduating with liberal studies from San Jose State University, and I was all into the good grades and honestly being perfect to impress people. That was how I felt like people liked me. But ultimately, that did eventually catch up with me. I was a teacher for 10 years under the same principal, and I was well liked, had a great reputation, was very hardworking, and honestly, I was the yes girl. I said yes to helping with every single thing, even when I was too busy really to accept. I always fitted in, even if it meant exhausting myself. I was so anxious that on the weekends, I would lay in bed worrying about what was going to happen at school all day and all weekend long and not be able to enjoy my time off at all. But I didn't go to the doctor to get help. I was trying to become a mom, and I didn't want to possibly be on medication that was going to prevent me from being able to have a healthy pregnancy. So I stayed silent. I didn't want to admit that I was struggling. I just kept telling myself, I'm just going to try harder. I'm just going to push harder. I'm just going to get through it. Inside, I was miserable, but I kept going up until that principal that I worked for retired, and I got a new one. And with my new principal, I got thrown into severe fight or flight panic mode. I was panicked because she had high expectations, which is not a bad thing, but I also had high expectations of myself. And unfortunately, that combination was brutal because I started overthinking and obsessing over how I was going to make every lesson that I taught, the math, the language arts, the social studies, the social emotional learning, the PE, a high quality lesson that best met the needs of every single type of student that I had in my classroom. And that is a great practice. That is what we should always be doing anyways. But I was holding myself to such a high standard that I wouldn't settle for good enough. There was no good enough. I needed to be great because I knew that principal could walk into the classroom at any point in time, and I wanted to blow her away with my ability to be a good teacher. So what ended up happening is, even though I was going to therapy and trying to get help, nothing was really working. I was staying up all night long, laying in bed, trying to sleep, but not being able to shut my brain off. My brain would swirl again and again and again with thoughts about how can I make this better? How can I change this? How can I make this better for my English learners, etc. And it was exhausting. I was exhausted that I wasn't falling asleep. And then this anxious spiral would spin around about the facts that I hadn't slept. And oh my gosh, I'm going to have to wake up in 4 hours and I still haven't fallen asleep. And this went on for days and weeks on end. And then the anxiety got so bad that my stomach stopped working. I could not digest food. I had no appetite whatsoever. I could not will myself to eat despite knowing that I needed to. And I pushed and I pushed and I pushed and tried to make it through. I went to my doctor and I asked to be put on anxiety medication. But unfortunately, that kind of a medication, an SSRI that I got put on, initially I got put on Lexapro, later it was Zoloft, but both of those take 6 to 8 weeks to work if they work at all. Some of them don't even work for you and you need to try something else. Plus, oftentimes you need to go up on the medication slowly, like each month going up like 5 milligrams, depending on the particular medication. So I needed time. I needed patience. And I did not have patience because I was getting exhausted living each day as a 5th grade teacher in a fight or flight mode, feeling so anxious, sleep deprived, and without any nourishment. And I eventually got to the point where on the first Friday of school, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I could not be the teacher that my students needed. I could not provide them with the high level of instruction that they deserved because my body could not calm down. And I wish that I could have gotten some magical solution really quickly that was going to solve that, but I didn't. I had a medication that was going to take weeks to work. I had a therapist, but the therapist wasn't able to make any type of suggestion to me that was just going to make the anxiety go away. And I was not able to convince myself to eat or to be able to sleep, despite trying things like melatonin. And so I was stuck. And I made a decision that honestly, to this day, I kind of regret, but is what I needed to do in the time. I chose to go on a medical leave of absence from work. And this actually happened to me twice, but the stories are so similar that my brain has actually combined these two stories together into being one story because they basically happened 2 years in a row with 2 different new principals. So I took a leave from work because I felt like I couldn't be a good teacher. But unfortunately, when I took that leave from work, even though I had a medical note from my doctor saying that I was on a medical leave, that I needed to be on disability, and it didn't even explain the specifics of why, but my doctor understood that it was because I was trying to adjust to medication and that I wanted to wait until the medication was working before I went back to work. I suddenly felt like a failure. I felt incompetent. I felt like I could never show my face again at work. I felt like such a failure and a letdown. I felt like I let down my colleagues, my students' parents. And in reality, some of them I probably did let down. But I felt like I was not worthy of taking the break. I felt like I had to hide behind what I was going through because I wanted people to believe that it was a physical illness that I was experiencing, that was why I was on medical leave. I felt like being on medical leave for anxiety was not a good enough reason and that they would judge me for it. So I hid it for the longest time and didn't tell people why I was out. I just said that I was on an unexpected medical leave. And I wish I could say that I just took those 8 weeks. I waited for the medication to work and then I went back to work. But unfortunately, that anxious spiral of negative self-talk, telling myself that I am a failure, I am not enough, I am not good enough, I can't go back to work, I am incompetent, those repetitive messages really harmed me. So instead of just having anxiety, I fell into a deep depression. And depression was something I had never really experienced before. And it got dark fast. On, I think, like the 3rd day of my being on medical leave, I had to reach out to my doctor, to my parents, to my husband, and tell them that for the first time ever, And my entire life, I was experiencing suicidal thoughts. And it scared me. It terrified me because even though I knew at the time that I was not going to act on them, it was terrifying to have these thoughts popping into my head. And I knew because I had lost my godbrother to suicide, I knew that I needed to ask for help, that I couldn't stay silent, that I had to tell somebody. We had also lost my mother-in-law to suicide. So it ran in multiple ways in our experiences. And so I did, even though it was scary, I told my husband, and he suggested that we call the doctor. So I did. Actually, we called the ER, and they told us to call the advice nurse. And the advice nurse basically just told me that I sounded like I was having a panic attack, and that I should take some deep breaths and go outside for a walk and see a doctor tomorrow. That's what they told me. It was not very helpful at all. I did eventually get a hold of my actual doctor after a lot of advocacy, and she prescribed me some benzos, which are medications that have risks associated with them. They can cause addiction, so it's something you should tread very lightly on. But she prescribed me Ativan, which made it so that I at least could calm my anxiety enough to get by while we were trying to figure things out. She told me about the addictive risk of them, and she assured me that this was going to be a short-term solution, but it was just meant to get me by so I would be okay. She suggested that I go to a partial hospitalization program, which I did go to after much reluctance because I was very scared. I was very afraid of it. I didn't know what to expect, but I did eventually go because she told me it was going to get me better quicker, and also because my therapist told me that I was above a level of care that my therapist could provide. She was already doing sessions twice a week when typically people would go once a week to her, and she knew that I needed a higher level of care. So I did try the PHP, the Partial Hospitalization Program, and basically what that entailed was sitting in a circle with about 7 other people, reflecting on how our day had gone the day before, setting goals, learning coping skills, strategies like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. It involved me seeing a psychiatrist twice a week, getting blood work done to see if anything else was going on that might have been causing those types of panicked feelings. And it helped. It absolutely helped. For the first time in my life, I was connected with other people who were struggling with their mental health and willing to talk about it out loud. I was able to realize that I wasn't alone, and I was able to realize that there were strategies that I could implement. But again, it wasn't working fast enough. I wasn't getting better fast enough. I knew it was going to take time, and it was really unbearable to wait for things to get better. I did do an IOP as well, an intensive outpatient program. And really, I should have stayed in the PHP longer, but insurance is a nightmare and you have to get your insurance to approve it. And they'll only approve it usually for some certain time frame. And then they're going to want you to step down. An IOP program, intensive outpatient program, is 4 days a week for 3 hours a day. And mine was done virtually. I will tell you, I wish I didn't do it virtually because virtually I was not able to get nearly as much help or support as what I was able to get in person. Getting out of the house, having a reason to get out of bed, interacting with other human beings was a big thing for me in my healing journey. And doing a virtual program gave me agoraphobia. It made me a fear of going outside, fear of interacting with other people, fear of doing just about anything. And just the only safe place I had anymore was my bed. That was where I wanted to spend all of my time. At the depths of my depression, all I wanted to do all day long was to hide in bed, and I wanted to sleep. I wanted to sleep and sleep and sleep and oversleep because that was my only escape. Otherwise, my brain was in these constant thoughts of suicidal thoughts over and over and over and over and over again. And it was an absolute nightmare. And if it wasn't that, it was panic attacks again and again and again, worrying about all kinds of different things. And so I was stuck. I was stuck in this nightmare of never ending depression and anxiety thoughts. And I told people knew. I actually asked my dad to take me to the ER early on. And I let them know that I was having these thoughts. And they asked me, "Are you going to do something to yourself right now if we release you?" And I said, "No, not right now." And so they sent me home. I was not admitted to inpatient even when I thought I should be. I cried for help again when I was in partial hospitalization program. And And they told me that they didn't have enough beds, and unless it was an urgent emergency, they were not going to take me. So again, I was turned away. And I wish I could say that things just got better with time. But unfortunately, I became so afraid of going back to work, what that would mean for me, that I wanted to avoid it at all costs. And unfortunately, my unhealthy brain at the time started to lie to myself and told myself that the only way that I was going to escape this idea of going back to work was if I killed myself. And I believed that because I didn't feel like I had any other options. I felt like this was the only job that I was trained to do. I had a master's in education, a multiple subject credential. I felt like there was nothing else that I could do to provide for my family. And I felt like if I was not providing for my family, then I had no purpose on this earth, because my purpose was to be a mom. And if I couldn't be a good mom, if I couldn't provide them with what they needed, if I was a burden, if I was laying in bed asleep all day, not able to go to soccer or gymnastics or to take them to school, what good was I? I truly began to believe, unfortunately, that everyone was better off without me. And then my husband said something that he definitely regrets, but he told me, Jessica, you're not getting better. You're not getting better. You need to get better faster. What are you going to do to get better? You're not making any progress. And he was trying to encourage me to try harder, but unfortunately, I took that as you're not good enough. What you're able to do is not enough. And it made me feel like, okay, I'm no good to him either. And for the longest time, he had been supporting me and helping me through it and carrying me through it and saying, it's fine, just take it a day at a time. But everybody gets exhausted and at their breaking point at some point. And at some point, people say the wrong thing. And he acknowledges it now. He really regrets saying it, but it happened. And when that happened, I went over to my dad's apartment, my parents' apartment, but my mom was out of town. And I told him what happened. And he told me that I should seek therapy to try to get couples therapy to save our marriage. And I was so overwhelmed because I was just like, I can't do one more thing right now. I'm already navigating so much. And my dad said, well, he's right. You know, this is unsustainable in the long term. And this again is something that my dad really regrets saying. I don't even sure if he remembers he said it, but I know he would regret that he said it. Yes, was it unsustainable to have my parents showing up constantly, bailing me out, helping with childcare, helping me when I felt unsafe to be alone? Yeah, that probably was unsustainable. But the solution wasn't death. The solution was going to inpatient psychiatric care where someone else could keep me safe. And unfortunately, I had asked for that multiple times and I had been turned away. So that is a flaw in the system. It is not a flaw with my husband. It is not a flaw with my dad. It is not a flaw with my parents. It is a flaw in the system because a therapist knew, a doctor knew, a psychiatrist knew, actually multiple therapists knew, multiple ER doctors knew, my parents knew, my husband knew. And unfortunately, none of it was enough to prevent what was about to happen. So October 23rd, 2.5 years ago from now, in the past, um, I started to take my own life. I went downstairs, I went into the garage, and I was going to end it. I got very, very close, but fortunately I had my phone with me, and I just had this thought that my family's going to ask why I didn't call, because my family had always said to call. My dad had always said, call me. If that's happening, call me. And I thought, I don't want them to think, why didn't she call? And so I got down, I came inside, and I called my husband who was biking to work. And he was just starting a new job. So I felt horrible. I felt like I am messing up his new job, telling him to come back right now. But I said, can you come home? And thank goodness he said yes, because I don't know where I would be right now if he had said no, screw you. But he came home. And I told him what had happened. And he asked what I wanted to do. And I said, I want to go to the ER. I want to get admitted to inpatient. And he said, okay, let's do it. You've been asking for this for a long time. Let's do it. And so we went and I told the ER what had happened, and they put me into a hospital room where they took everything out. They confiscated all of my stuff, including my wedding rings. And I waited there all day long while they looked to get me a bed in a psychiatric unit. And I was like, where am I going? What's happening? They weren't giving me any information. I knew I was going to be put on a 5150 hold, which is an involuntary hold, which is ironic since I showed up there voluntarily, but it's just how it works. And so all day long, I basically just sat there freaking the heck out, not knowing what was going to happen to me. And we waited, we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And eventually a bed did open up, and I was transported by ambulance on a gurney without my husband with a fluffy lemonade pillow to an inpatient psychiatric unit about 30 minutes away from where I lived. It was terrifying. I was terrified of being there, even though I knew it was where I needed to be. I was given a roommate, and I was not excited about that, about not having any level of privacy, but it was necessary. I will go into my experience in inpatient as an entirely separate episode because that is a long story in and of itself. But I was there for 3 days, and when I got out, people took me more seriously. Suddenly, my psychiatrist was considering transcranial magnetic stimulation as a treatment when that is not something that had ever been brought up before then. The first time I ever had it brought up was when I was in inpatient psychiatric care. So we tried to get a referral for that. I tried to get into a new partial hospitalization program because the old one rejected me and wouldn't take me back because they said that I was a failure because I wasn't able to safety plan properly. And because I hadn't prevented my attempt, they basically felt like they were incapable of helping me. So they just left me to flounder. So I was taken out of inpatient without being given a solid plan. And I was left to navigate and flail while feeling like a failure and feeling like a letdown and feeling like I would not I would not get through this guilt and shame of what I was feeling of what had happened. But somehow I did get by, thank goodness. Somehow I found another PHP and I started TMS, Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation. I did 36 individual sessions of getting a magnet pulsing on my head while my psychiatrist continued to work on getting my dosage of my medication correct. And fortunately, I did get better. I got so much better that I was finally scoring a 0 on the PH9 and GAD-7, which are surveys relating to depression and anxiety, when in the past I had been scoring the worst possible score on both of those for months on end. I started to feel happy again. I started to feel motivated again. I started to feel excited about lesson planning again. And I eventually was able to go back to work. And that was such a feeling of victory. I found my voice. I was able to stick up for what I needed at work. I was able to embrace a new way of teaching where I was no longer holding myself to a perfectionist standard. And I felt like I had finally figured it all out. I had finally made it. And then I ultimately came to the realization that this still wasn't what I wanted. I was adjusting so that I could find my voice and have better work-life balance and continuing to take medication and go to weekly therapy. But there was always something about teaching that was really hard on me. There was an anxiety of wanting to people please, to make all of my students happy, all of my students' parents happy, all of my colleagues happy, my boss happy. And when you add all those people together, it's over 100 people that you are trying to make happy. And when their desires and needs differ, it is absolutely impossible to make everyone happy. And you will stress yourself out trying. And unfortunately, I would occasionally, not often, but I would occasionally get emails or have meetings where parents were upset with me. And even though I knew that 99% of the time I was making people happy, it was that tiny 1% that would keep me up at night, that would make me not be able to enjoy the rest of my life, not be able to be the mom that I wanted to be, because the anxiety would consume me so badly that I was unable to be fully mentally present for my husband or for my kids, or honestly for myself. I was not engaging in any types of hobbies or leisure activities because I was just barely getting by, just barely staying afloat. And this is while being on Zoloft, which is an SSRI, being on Boost Bar, which is an anxiety medication, being on propranolol, which treats dysautonomia, which is a dysregulation of your nervous system, and being on Remeron, which is also an antidepressant and anti-anxiety med. So I was on basically four, and I still am on all of those, 4 medications, going to regular weekly individual therapy as well as group therapy through my work. And none of that was enough. And for the longest time, I felt like I was the problem. I felt like I was just too broken. There were too many issues with me, with my mental health, and that I just wasn't going to get better. But I ultimately came to the realization one day Maybe I'm not the problem. Maybe I'm part of the problem, but maybe I'm not the whole problem. Maybe I am putting myself in an environment that is quite literally making me sick. And it's not to insult the environment, because maybe for some people it's fine. But for me, that heightened state of stress, that heightened state of being in a environment in which it triggered my nervous system to go into fight or flight every single day, where I felt jittery and sick to my stomach and shaky and nervous and my heart beating fast. Maybe for me, for my particular nervous system, that was not an environment that I needed to be putting my body in every single day. And maybe it wasn't that my nervous system was destined to be anxious all the time, but maybe it was that that environment was too stressful for me and my body was never going to heal as long as I was there. So I ultimately made the decision that I needed to get out of that environment, because that environment was slowly damaging both my mental and my physical health. Because when your mental health goes downhill, so does your physical health, because you overeat, you stop exercising. There were so many complicated issues, and I was dealing with physical health issues at the same time. I was dealing with idiopathic intracranial hypertension, which is exacerbated by obesity, and my antidepressants were making my obesity worse. So I was navigating a whole lot of things at once. And I knew I wanted to get out, but I didn't know how I was going to get out. Teaching was all I knew. I had a master's in it. I still have a master's in education. That was all I knew I was trained to do. And I felt like there was no way I was going to be able to provide for my family in any other kind of a capacity. I knew I could go get a job, at Target or a fast food place or something, but that was not going to bring in the same kind of income. We have a mortgage to pay. I have 2 kids who take gymnastics and dance and swimming and soccer and basketball. And how was I going to be somebody who provided for my family? Because if I couldn't provide for my family, I would see myself as a failure. I didn't see being a stay-at-home mom as an option because it didn't seem financially feasible, and I felt stuck. So for the longest time, I knew I wanted to leave, but I couldn't leave because I had no other option. So I was just trying to survive and make it work. But on the side, I started talking about my mental health on social media, honestly, because I needed to process it, because the grief of the past was so heavy. It was weighing me down so badly that my depression still frequently felt really horrible. And so I started to speak out, hoping that I could find other people who had gone through it too. And I did. I found other people who were healing out loud, who weren't afraid to talk about it. And then other people who were afraid to talk about it, but were so glad that I was talking about it, because for the first time in their life, they felt safe saying what they were going through when they had never felt safe to do that before. And it was so incredibly healing for me. And initially, it was just that. It was a support network that I was creating just to talk. But slowly it began to monetize as a side hustle. And initially I dabbled in the idea that maybe I'll be a teacher and do this on the side and it'll be nice vacation money. But I watched other people who were doing this full time, who were TikTok live hosts full time and were doing this for their careers and saying phrases like, "Why not you?" And I ultimately asked myself, why not me? I can do what they're doing. I'm not going to be them. I'm going to be my own person, but I can do it. I can do it. I can host a live room where I help people, and I can make money this way. I can make money a different way. So I started dabbling in it more seriously. And in January of this most recent school year, I put in for a 1-year leave of absence from my job starting in June. I knew I needed to finish out the school year, but now I'm on a leave of absence. And for 1 month so far, I have been building my own business, Jessica Glow Up LLC. So far, I am monetized on TikTok. I do live hosting every single day. I'm also a TikTok shop affiliate where I promote other people's products and earn commissions. I have big dreams. I have dreams of getting this podcast started, dreams of getting a Glow Up apparel line going, dreams of getting a website going with modules to help people learn the basic skills to navigate the mental health industry. And I recognize that I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. I don't have that formal training. So I know that I'm never going to be that person for people, but I can be the bridge in between. I can be a voice of what it's like to navigate the system. I can explain to people the scary things about it, the real things about it. I can be an honest voice that hopefully at least gives people permission to talk. Hopefully, I can tell you, I have met so many people who don't even know that 988 exists. It is a phone number you can call or text for mental health support. And so many people do not even know that it exists. And I'm so thankful that I'm able to share that resource and save lives. And that is my goal, not to save lives for any type of fame for having saved lives, but to save lives because I know what it's like to be in their shoes, to be barely getting by, just trying to survive, and to need anything that is going to help you stay another day. So that is my goal of the Glow Up podcast and my goal of Jessica Glow Up LLC, the company. My goal is to light up people's lives, to help people find that inner spark again, to find that passion, to find that happiness, to be able to live a life in which the light comes back in after it has gone so dark that you are worried that your flame is going to go out forever. So if I am able to help one person through my words, my story, it will mean something. But I also acknowledge that my story is just one story, and we need to hear multiple stories, multiple voices. There is so much wisdom and insight that comes from each person's experience. And I'm so blessed to be building a community on TikTok in which we are getting to know so many people on their own healing journeys. And there is so much wisdom and healing that happens as we talk amongst each other. So that is what I hope to do as I continue this podcast. I will share my story as a starting point, but I hope to bring on other voices of other people who are healing so that we can learn together and we can navigate this system together, because nobody deserves the pain that they go through, but everybody deserves to have somebody to go through it with. And maybe you can turn your pain into purpose by turning your story into somebody else's survival guide. And that is why we heal out loud, so that we can glow up together. If you or someone you know is struggling with their mental health, please call or text 988 for mental health support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anywhere in the United States. If you are looking to connect with me, I am at Jessica Glow Up, live host on all platforms, or you can email me Jessica Glow Up live host at gmail.com. I look forward to chatting with you guys more. If you're interested in being on the show, please email me so we can discuss that possibility. I would love to have more people sharing their stories. Please know that you are loved. You are not a burden. The world is a better place with you in it. And until next time, stay glowing.